Spending, that's our problem in this country. We spend more than we can afford. Our budget is out of whack. And a new report made available exclusively by the Joint Economic Committee to the Willis report today, well, it only reinforces that idea. According to the study, for every dollar in tax increases enacted by this Congress, they spend nearly twice that much, $1.91. That's right, when you allow Congress to raise taxes, they spend it all and then some. The committee took into consideration 7 major bills, including health care, the stimulus, and jobless benefit extensions. Taken together, the new laws levied $625 billion in higher taxes and will result in $1.2 trillion in new spending over the decade. This is a pretty appalling record. No wonder America's broke. But that's just my 2 cents. And this is the Willis Report. Good evening, everybody. I'm Jerry Willis. Tax and spend, tax and spend. The administration wants you to believe this is not reality, that the bills being passed won't hurt the deficit. But a new report from the Joint Economic Committee's minority staff pours water all over that claim. And here's the kicker. They took their data from the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office to compile the report. Texas Congressman Kevin Brady is the ranking House Republican on the Joint Economic Committee and the author of this report. Welcome, Congressman.
Hello, Jerry. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm a little upset about this report, though, I got to tell you. How is it that you can say on the one hand, I'm going to increase spending this much, but in reality, what you really do is raise those numbers ever higher?
Well, yeah, the president and I guess the Democrats are saying that we have to raise taxes on small businesses and professionals to reduce the deficit. But every chance they've had to raise taxes, over $600 billion, they didn't spend a dime of it to actually reduce the deficit. They spent all of it plus more, and it raises the question of, is the president going to use all these new taxes to reduce the deficit, given a track record without exception? Not a dime was used to reduce the deficit. It all went to more spending and expanded government.
More spending, more expanded government. You know, they keep telling us, though, that these programs are paid for. Health care reform was supposed to be paid for, Congressman.
Well, none of these programs are paid for, and that's what the report shows. In fact, the tax increases were spent and then spent again in new spending. So actually going deeper into the hole, we suspect, I think most Americans do, that any tax increases, which really are foolish enough as we try to recover in this economy, but every dollar of it isn't going to go, none of it's going to go to actually reduce the deficit. It'll go to sustain a unsustainable government.
Well, and it brings up the question, I think, when you talk about what will be tax hikes, when the Bush tax cuts expire at the end of the year, if they allow that to happen or allow it to happen for some folks, that money is just going to be put to work and then some. I mean, it seems like we can't trust this Congress with what they're promising about how they're going to spend our tax dollars.
Well, that is the question. Do you trust this president and this Democratic Congress to use all those new tax revenues to pay down the debt, or will they use it to just expand government? The answer, at least 7 times without exception, is they use it to spend and expand, and that's not what the American public wants. Another reason we shouldn't allow tax increases to go forward.
All right, well, so let's get serious here then. Let's talk about where you would cut. You know, we've got deficit spending of $1.4 trillion. We've got a huge overspending here. What are you going to cut first? Are you going to go after the entitlement programs? What's the right answer?
You know, I think at the end of the day, we're going to have to act like a business. I think we freeze hiring at the federal level, except obviously for our security needs. We go back to we start with going back to the pre-bailout, pre-stimulus government levels. We'll need to go trimmer than that. I think we need to sunset the obsolete agencies and duplications. You cut, which is where voters have identified, I think, $1.2 trillion of tax cuts spending cuts they'd like to see. I think we ought to bring a spending cut to the floor every week, have a straight up or down vote so that over a year or two, taxpayers will know exactly if their lawmaker is serious about reducing the deficit or not.
Well, you talk about getting rid of duplication, but in reality, the real spending is in those entitlement programs. It's Medicare, it's Medicaid, it's Social Security. Those are the programs that are rising exponentially in cost with really no end in sight. What do you do to the entitlement programs, Congressman?
You know, I think the first thing you do is you assure those who are on it that it's going to be preserved. And then you take the steps to long-term use the glide path to get those back into a sustainable financial situation. I think with Medicare, that means getting the fraud knocked out of that system, giving seniors more choices. I think with Social Security, we've got to look at issues from age to return on the investment, to giving younger workers more choices so that money goes to work for them.
So when
I
you
think
say
there's some
age,
good
pardon me,
ideas
sir,
out there.
when you say age, pardon me, in terms of Social Security, you're talking about raising the retirement age, I presume?
Yeah, yeah, clearly. I mean, over the next 30 to 40 years, that
30 to 40
age
years. I
has
thought we were
to
doing this all
adjust to it.
tomorrow. I thought every week we were bringing a new spending cut to the floor. Do you mean
No, I'm
down the
talking
road, or
about
who are you talking about?
I'm talking about the specific solutions to Social Security. As we live longer, obviously Social Security needs to be adjusted. That's over time. But I think the spending control has to happen now. In fact, one of the reasons we didn't want to adjourn as Republicans, we want to extend the tax cuts and start controlling spending.
So I've got to ask you about those tax cuts. It looks like it's going to be something that happens after the election now, obviously. What's that going to mean as a practical matter? I mean, a lot of people will be voting on those cuts who may not have a job in Congress anymore. They're not going to be beholden to us. So how do we make sure that what we want to see happens?
Well, you need to be worried. I think Democrats intend to raise taxes. They just don't want to do it before the election. I think they're counting on the lame duck to do it. And the Republicans, I can tell you, are geared up to blocking those tax increases. This is exactly the wrong thing to do, especially in this economic downturn.
Well, Congressman Brady, thanks for bringing us these numbers. Just fantastic information. Really appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Jerry.